a traffic ticket, and a curious judge. The air in the courtroom thrummed with hushed expectation. Sunlight blazed through the arched windows, igniting a ballet of dust motes and stretching shadows over the weathered pews. From his high perch, Judge Jedediah Thompson, his face etched with the chronicles of countless judgments, scanned the scene. He adjusted his tie, a loud display of cartoon scales, a Monday ritual to inject some levity into the proceedings. "All right, settle down," he announced, his resonant voice filling the space. "Let's get started. Nguyen Maya, traffic infraction. Is Ms. Nguyen present?" A young woman in the front row, almost hidden by the massive bench, timidly raised a hand. Petite and almost frail, Maya Nguyen's severe bun accentuated her delicate features. A too large navy dress seemed to swallow her, and her wide, dark eyes nervously darted around. "Ms. Nguyen." Judge Thompson's tones softened a notch. "The prosecution asserts you exceeded the speed limit by 15 miles per hour within a school zone. What is your plea?" A swallow tightened Maya's delicate throat as she rose. "Your Honor," she offered, her voice barely reaching the bench. "I plead not guilty." A ripple of surprise spread through the room. Traffic violations rarely inspired such firm denials. Intrigued, Judge Thompson leaned forward. "Not guilty, you say? Ms. Nguyen, are you represented by counsel?" Maya hesitated, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. "No, Your Honor." "Very well. The court can appoint a public defender, should you desire. We have several fine attorneys well equipped to assist." "Your Honor," Maya interjected, a sudden strength in her voice. "I wish to represent myself." The murmur amplified to a low roar. Judge Thompson's eyebrows shot skyward, vanishing under his thick, silver hair. He tapped his pen against the gavel, a slow, deliberate tattoo. You wish to be your own advocate?" he inquired, a hint of amusement coloring his tone. "Ms. Nguyen, are you fully aware of the complexities inherent in mounting a legal defense? This is not a debate over household rules." A delicate flush colored Maya's cheeks, but her gaze remained fixed. "Yes, Your Honor, I am aware. I have studied the relevant statutes and case history." Judge Thompson chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Studied them, have you? Well, that's certainly ambitious. But studying the law and its practice are hardly the same thing, Ms. Nguyen. Do you comprehend that you will be facing a seasoned prosecutor?" He indicated a burly man near the prosecution table, his beard neatly trimmed, his expression perpetually bored. Brody rarely lost these simple cases. Maya nodded, an unexpected resolve emanating from her slight frame. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." Judge Thompson steepled his fingers, studying Maya. He'd seen the spectrum of human experience in his courtroom: hardened criminals, vulnerable victims, and every nuance in between. But a young woman, barely past adolescence, seeking to contest a speeding ticket on her own? That was novel. He weighed his options. He could deny her, appoint counsel, and be done. Yet something in Maya's quiet determination, a strength masked by her delicate appearance, sparked his interest. "Ms. Nguyen," he said, his voice now devoid of levity, "do you grasp that you are relinquishing your right to legal representation? Are you aware of the possible ramifications should you be found culpable?" "Yes, Your Honor," Maya affirmed, her voice clear and steady. "I understand." Judge Thompson leaned back, the leather chair groaning in response. He surveyed the room, noting the spectators' captivated faces. He appreciated a good spectacle, and this had the scent of one brewing. Furthermore, there was something in her that intrigued him. Was she naive, or hiding a clever agenda? "All right, Ms. Nguyen," he conceded, a sly smile flickering across his lips. "I'll allow it. You may proceed pro se." He paused, allowing the buzz to subside. "However," he added, his voice regaining its commanding edge, "I expect strict adherence to decorum and the law. Do not presume that I shall show leniency due to your self-representation. This is a court of law, not an arena for pleasantries." Maya inclined her head, a hint of gratitude flashing across her face. "Thank you, Your Honor. I understand." Satisfied, Judge Thompson nodded. Very well. Mr. Brody, you may commence with your opening statement. Brody, visibly surprised by this development, cleared his throat and approached the podium. He laid out the prosecution's case, detailing the officer's observations and the radar evidence. He delivered his words with the practiced ease of someone reciting a well-worn script. When Brody concluded, Judge Thompson addressed Maya. Ms. Nguyen, your opportunity. Do you have an opening statement? Maya rose, her hands clasped tightly before her. She inhaled deeply, her gaze sweeping the courtroom before focusing on Judge Thompson. Your Honor, she began, her voice firm and resonant. The prosecution will attempt to prove my excessive speed. However, I will demonstrate the evidence's unreliability and the officer's testimony's flaws. I will establish that the radar device was improperly calibrated and that the officer's speed estimation was affected by circumstantial factors. I will further contend that, even if a speed infraction occurred, the conditions merit a degree of consideration. A hush descended. Maya's words, delivered with such composed confidence, hung in the atmosphere. For the first time, Judge Thompson experienced a genuine spark of surprise. This was no mere innocent. She was clearly prepared. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed, his earlier amusement supplanted by growing curiosity. This case, he sensed, would be far more compelling than he had initially judged. The scales of justice, he mused, might be poised for an unexpected shift. He tapped his gavel once, sharply. Proceed, Ms. Nguyen, he said, his voice charged with anticipation. Let us see your argument. Truth or lie? A legal game begins. Judge Thompson tented his fingers, the overhead fluorescence reflecting off the gleam of his heavy rings. Ms. Nguyen, he began, a mischievous glint defying his advanced years. You project a startling self-assurance for someone uninitiated in legal intricacies. Pray tell, does the term Daubert standard ring a bell? Maya's composure faltered for a heartbeat. The Daubert standard? The keystone of expert testimony admissibility, enshrined in Federal Rule 702? That particular legal arcana hadn't crossed her mind in years. She hadn't even completed law school. She hadn't even entered it. Forcing a tight smile, she offered. Familiar, Your Honor. Thompson chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Familiar. A treacherous term in this arena, Ms. Nguyen. It dances the line between knowledge and ignorance. Let us engage in a brief exercise. A game of truth or conjecture. I shall posit statements pertaining to the law. Your task is to discern their veracity. 3 correct answers, and you earn my considerable admiration. 3 errors. The unspoken consequence hung heavy in the air. His willingness to entertain her charade would evaporate. Anxiety surged, a cold wave threatening to drown her. This was preposterous. He was toying with her. Yet, within the game lay an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate she was more than a callow interloper. Refusal would brand her as weak, validating his skepticism. Acceptance, that path was fraught with peril. Her gaze flicked to the empty public gallery, save for a lone figure hunched over a notepad in the rear. Brand Miller. The reporter hadn't spared her a glance. A speeding ticket hearing held scant appeal. Well, Ms. Nguyen? Judge Thompson prodded, amusement coloring his tone. Maya swallowed against a suddenly parched throat. This wasn't part of the day's blueprint. Yet, a blueprint was merely a point of origin. And hadn't her grandmother instilled in her the principle of never retreating from a challenge, particularly when the stakes soared? Very well, Your Honor, she replied, the steadiness in her voice a surprise even to herself. I accept your challenge. Judge Thompson's smile broadened, revealing a glimpse of artificial teeth. Splendid! Let us commence. Evidence secured in violation of constitutional protections is inadmissible in court. Without hesitation, Maya affirmed. True. Very well. Now, consider this. Res ipsa loquitur is applicable when the defendant possessed sole control over the instrumentality that produced the injury, and that injury is of a type not usually seen without negligence. This one presented a greater hurdle. Res ipsa loquitur. The doctrine of manifest negligence. Torts was a distant memory. Was he trying to ensnare her with legal Latin? She marshaled her thoughts, dredging up the intricacies of the principle. True, she stated, a fraction of a second too late. The hesitation rankled. Judge Thompson inclined his head slowly, his expression betraying nothing. Intriguing. Now, one final inquiry. A writ of certiorari is a mechanism by which an appellate court selects cases for discretionary review. The Supreme Court of the United States uses certiorari to decide most of the cases it adjudicates. Maya's pulse hammered. This was the crux of it. The Supreme Court. Familiar territory, yet treacherous ground. Most cases? That word held the key. She vaguely recalled something about specific appeals, cases the Supreme Court had to hear. Exceptions, but undeniably real. False, she responded, with newfound conviction. The Supreme Court has some mandatory appellate authority. Judge Thompson leaned back, his gaze unwavering. A protracted silence filled the courtroom, punctuated only by the sterile hum of the lights. Maya felt a trickle of perspiration slide down her spine. At last he broke the quiet. Accurate. Ms. Nguyen, you have impressed me. Your grasp of legal precepts surpasses that of the average layperson. He paused, and that familiar twinkle danced in his eyes once more. However, comprehension and application are distinct domains. I trust you're prepared for more than mere gamesmanship? Maya met his gaze head-on, her burgeoning confidence solidifying. I am, Your Honor. Bren Miller, who had been sketching a rather unkind likeness of Judge Thompson in her notepad, finally looked up. She stifled a yawn, her gaze darting between Maya and the judge. The young woman seemed transformed, more self-possessed. And the judge, was he actually sporting a faint smile? This was still a hearing about a speeding ticket, wasn't it? She checked her watch. 20 minutes tops, and she could slot this piece under local briefs and grab lunch. But something about the sudden alchemy in the courtroom, the palpable energy crackling between the judge and the defendant, it gave her pause, her pen suspended above the page. Perhaps, against all odds, there was a story worth telling here. Or, failing that, at least a marginally more stimulating way to spend her afternoon. She decided to cast a second glance at Maya's case. Surprising answers, growing intrigue. Ms. Nguyen, Judge Thompson announced, settling back into his chair, a subtle smile gracing his features. Let's test the mettle of this so-called knowledge. True or false, ignorance of the law is an acceptable defense? Maya, her cheeks still flushed from the initial sting of the legal sparring, drew herself up straighter. The courtroom's sterile light seemed to intensify, highlighting the anxious furrows around Ada Chen's tightly compressed lips. False, Your Honor, Maya responded, her voice imbued with newfound resolve. The principle of ignorantia juris non excusat dictates that a lack of awareness regarding a law does not absolve one of responsibility for its violation. Judge Thompson's eyebrows shot skyward, clearly surprised by her command of legal Latin. Indeed. Well played. Mr. Chen, you appear to have tasted something sour. 1 point to Ms. Nguyen, I believe. Chen merely clenched his jaw, his gaze fixed on a spot somewhere above Maya's head. He scribbled on his pad, the sound a sharp, almost violent scratch. A soft ripple of chatter spread through the gallery. Reporter Bren Miller's pen flew across his notebook, a grin widening on his face. This was certainly eclipsing the usual tedium of traffic court. Next, Judge Thompson declared, his eyes gleaming with amusement. True or false, probable cause equates to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Maya hesitated, briefly worrying her lip. The courtroom air hung heavy, thick with anticipation. False, Your Honor, she answered, her voice clear and unwavering. Probable cause represents a lower threshold. It establishes a reasonable basis for believing a crime may have occurred. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the rigorous standard required for a conviction. A low, rumbling chuckle emanated from Judge Thompson, resonating throughout the chamber. Another point. I confess I am impressed. Mr. Chen, the floor is yours, or perhaps you'd prefer to observe? Chen's pen clattered against the table, the the sound amplified in the sudden hush. Your Honor, with respect, this exercise is highly unorthodox. We are squandering valuable court time on what amounts to a parlor game. Unorthodox, perhaps, Judge Thompson conceded, his gaze unwavering on Maya. But hardly a waste. I am simply evaluating the defendant's grasp of the law before rendering a decision. Now, Ms. Nguyen, one final question for this round. True or false, the Fifth Amendment's protections only extend to self-incrimination within criminal proceedings? Maya inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. This felt like a trap. False, Your Honor. The Fifth Amendment also applies to civil matters where testimony could subsequently be used against the witness in a criminal trial. Judge Thompson leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. He steepled his fingers, his scrutiny intense. Correct once more. A clean sweep. Ms. Nguyen, you are a veritable cornucopia of surprises. Where did you acquire this knowledge? Maya faltered, unsure how much to divulge. I read extensively, she mumbled, avoiding his gaze. Read extensively, Judge Thompson echoed, a note of skepticism lacing his voice. Indeed. Well, Ms. Nguyen, I must confess I am intrigued. Mr. Chen, do you have further inquiries regarding the defendant's legal acuity, or shall we resume the hearing proper? Chen rose abruptly, the scrape of his chair against the floor a jarring sound. Your Honor, I object to this entire line of inquiry. It is entirely irrelevant to the issue at hand, a simple speeding violation. The evidence clearly demonstrates the defendant exceeded the speed limit. I move that the court find her guilty as charged. Judge Thompson sighed, the sound carrying a hint of weariness. Your objection is duly noted, Mr. Chen. However, I find Ms. Nguyen's understanding of legal principles germane to the matter. I am particularly fascinated by her defense, which appears to rest on a rather creative interpretation of the radar gun's calibration data. He paused, a glint returning to his eyes. Ms. Nguyen, would you care to illuminate the court with your argument? Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment. She had to sway him. She drew another calming breath and began to articulate her findings, her voice growing stronger and more assured with each word. She highlighted discrepancies in the calibration records, challenged the testing methodology, and referenced legal precedents that bolstered her case. As she presented her argument, Judge Thompson listened intently, his face an inscrutable mask. Chen remained standing, his expression a study in disapproval, interjecting the occasional muttered objection. Bren Miller, meanwhile, was practically buzzing with anticipation. This felt like the seed of something truly compelling. A headline began to form in his mind. Teen legal prodigy baffles prosecutor in courtroom battle? It needed refinement, but the core of the story was undeniable. The courtroom was hushed, captivated by Maya's every word, the atmosphere charged with expectation. Even the court clerk, typically immune to the courtroom theatrics, was leaning forward, listening with rapt attention. Maya Nguyen, who had entered the room an hour prior, intimidated and unsure, now commanded the attention of the entire courtroom. Upping the ante, hypothetical challenges. Judge Thompson leaned back, a mischievous glint in his eye. All right, Ms. Nguyen, he began, his voice adopting the measured cadence of a law professor. Let's move beyond the basics. Imagine a town enacts a law banning the sale of any food exceeding 5% saturated fat within a mile of a school. A bakery, famous for its rich, buttery croissants, sues, claiming it violates the Dormant Commerce Clause. How do you argue that case? Maya's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. The air in the room seemed to grow heavy, charged. This was no longer a simple traffic matter. This was constitutional law, pure and potent. A tremor of apprehension threatened to undo her carefully constructed poise. Her father's relentless coaching echoed in her memory, the countless hours spent dissecting legal texts, the fierce determination to prove her worth. She drew a steadying breath, suppressing the rising tide of unease. Your Honor, she began, her voice now finding its firm footing. The bakery would contend that the ordinance unfairly targets interstate commerce by favoring local vendors, perhaps using less saturated fat, unduly burdening bakeries from elsewhere with established recipes. They'd invoke Pike v. Bruce Church Incorporated asserting the burden far outweighs any local benefits. A murmur rippled through the observers. ADHN shifted, his face a study in ill-concealed chagrin. He hadn't anticipated this level of preparedness. Judge Thompson gave a slow nod, a spark of what might have been respect flickering in his gaze. Interesting. But what if the town argues the ordinance protects the health of schoolchildren, a valid local concern? Your response? Maya paused, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities. I would submit that less discriminatory alternatives exist to achieve that goal. They could introduce nutrition education in schools, or implement clear labeling for all food products. An outright ban is needlessly broad and restrictive. Moreover, the plaintiffs might demonstrate that they are not the only vendor affected. Doing so would fortify their challenge to the law's reach. Bren Miller's pen danced across her notepad, a frantic flurry of strokes. This was more than a simple attempt to avoid a traffic fine. This was compelling. She scribbled. Dormant Commerce Clause, investigate, underlining it with emphatic fervor. This young woman was not just articulate, she possessed real depth. And the contrast with Chen's obvious discomfort? Priceless. Judge Thompson steepled his fingers, his gaze unwavering on Maya. Very well. Let's explore a more complex scenario. A state requires all commercial trucks within its borders to have mud flaps of a unique design, unlike those common elsewhere. A trucking company challenges, claiming a Commerce Clause violation. Your argument? Maya's initial confidence wavered for a fraction of a second, but she swiftly regained her composure. This was trickier ground. Your Honor, the trucking company would argue that the state law places an undue burden on interstate commerce by demanding trucks be retrofitted with specialized, uncommon mud flaps. This boosts costs for any interstate carrier, potentially disrupting the flow of commerce. They'd likely cite Southern Pacific Company v. Arizona, claiming that even if the state's safety concerns are valid, the burden imposed outweighs them. She paused, adding, the company could also challenge the mud flap requirement on the grounds that it doesn't materially improve safety. If existing flaps already meet federal standards, the state law becomes nothing more than a barrier to trade. Expert testimony could support that claim. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his expression enigmatic. And if the state could prove that this specific mud flap design significantly reduces spray and enhances visibility for following vehicles, thereby improving safety? Maya hesitated, her brow furrowed in thought. She was treading carefully now. Even with demonstrable improvements in safety, the company could still argue that the advantage is negligible considering the cost and trouble of complying with the law. They might invoke the Pike v. Bruce Church balancing test again, stating the burden outweighs any local benefit. The trick would be showing that the benefits are small, while the costs for interstate carriers are significant. A subtle smile touched her lips. She was finding her stride, relishing the legal jousting. The fear had dissipated, replaced by elation. She was holding her own, confronting a judge who clearly knew the legal landscape backward and forward. Bren Miller capped her pen, a surge of excitement coursing through her. This was beyond a human interest piece. This was an exposé in the making. A David and Goliath story with unexpected depth. The judge, seemingly playing with his food, and the young woman, remarkably prepared. She glanced at ADHN, whose face was almost purple. He clearly wished he were anywhere else. This was treasure. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Ms. Nguyen, you are exceptionally familiar with constitutional law. Where did you acquire such knowledge? Maya locked eyes with him, a glint of defiance in her gaze. I've done my homework, Your Honor. She wasn't about to reveal her father's influence, or the years of dedicated study. That was her ace in the hole. Judge Thompson gave a measured nod. Very well. Let's turn to the details of the radar gun calibration. His voice trailed off, as if struck by a sudden thought. He regarded Maya with undisguised curiosity, a slight smile curving his lips. The courtroom held its breath, suspended in anticipation. Driven by justice, a lifelong pursuit. A low drone filled the courtroom as Judge Thompson, face a study in practiced impartiality, settled back in his chair. "Ms. Nguyen," he began, his voice carrying the gravitas of his office. "Your command of constitutional law is striking. Rarely does this court encounter a defendant, particularly one facing a mere speeding charge, with such fluency in the nuances of the Dormant Commerce Clause. Perhaps you'd enlighten us as to the origins of this uncommon expertise?" Maya returned his gaze, a subtle smile gracing her lips. The fluorescent lights above painted her dark hair with a halo. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I submit that my competence to argue this case speaks for itself. The wellspring of my knowledge is irrelevant." Judge Thompson arched a brow, skepticism etched on his face. "Irrelevant? Surely, Ms. Nguyen, this court struggles to accept that such understanding arose spontaneously. Are you a paralegal, perhaps? A law student awaiting graduation? Or a recent graduate sweating bar results?" Bran Miller's pen danced across her notepad, leaving a trail of ink in its wake. "Source irrelevant?" That whispered untold stories. Everyone had roots, and Bran was determined to dig up Maya's. She glanced at ADHN, whose expression suggested he'd bitten into a particularly sour persimmon. A flicker of hesitation, almost undetectable, crossed Maya's face, the first crack in her composure. Bren, ever the observant journalist, catalogued the micro-expression. "My legal education, Your Honor, has been unorthodox. I haven't attended law school, if that clarifies the matter." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. Unorthodox barely scratched the surface. "I am self-taught," Maya declared, her voice gaining a resolute timbre. "Countless hours spent poring over tomes, dissecting precedents, and absorbing the tenets of jurisprudence. It's been a passion, a lifelong immersion." Judge Thompson tented his fingers, a pensive gesture. "A lifelong immersion, you say? Remarkable dedication for one so young. What ignited this fervor?" Maya's eyes flared, revealing a fervor that astonished even Bren. More than simple knowledge, it was burning conviction. "Justice, Your Honor. A deeply held belief that fairness should be accessible to all, irrespective of background. I've witnessed the system falter, leaving the vulnerable adrift, and I refuse to remain passive." The atmosphere in the courtroom thickened, charged with a new intensity. This had transcended a simple traffic infraction. Bren's mind reeled. This wasn't some guileless kid who'd stumbled onto luck. This was calculated. A performance, perhaps? But for what grand stage? She remembered the first impression, the oversized glasses, the shy demeanor. Now those seemed like a stage-managed persona, shed to reveal what lay beneath. A legal phenom? A champion for the underdog? Or something far more complex? ADHN squirmed, unsettled. He hadn't bargained for such ardor. He'd envisioned a straightforward traffic case, a swift victory, and a return to his overflowing caseload. Now, he faced a defendant who resembled a seasoned barrister more than a mere violator. "And you believe?" Judge Thompson probed, a trace of doubt coloring his words. "That contesting a speeding ticket is the most effective avenue to advance this noble objective?" Maya drew a fortifying breath. "This transcends the issue of a speeding ticket, Your Honor. It's about upholding principles. Ensuring laws are applied equitably and uniformly, that they don't unfairly encumber individuals or interstate commerce. It's about demanding accountability from those entrusted with power." She paused, her gaze encompassing the courtroom, meeting the eyes of observers, reporters, court personnel. Each case, no matter how insignificant, sends out ripples. It establishes precedent, shapes future rulings, and ultimately molds the very essence of justice. A hush descended, stifling even the usual ambient sounds. All were transfixed by Maya's eloquence, by the raw emotion that pulsed from her. Bren scribbled furiously, striving to capture the heart of the moment. This was more than a news item. It was a human drama, a clash of ideologies, a battle for the spirit of the judiciary. And she was bearing witness to it unraveling live, in an unassuming courtroom nestled in the city's core. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, shattering the stillness. Ms. Nguyen, your zeal is admirable. However, passion alone will not suffice. You must substantiate that the traffic stop was unlawful, that the officer breached your rights, and that the citation was issued erroneously. I fully intend to do so, Your Honor, Maya countered, her voice resonating with unwavering assurance. I am confident the evidence will unequivocally demonstrate the officer's lack of probable cause, the radar gun's improper calibration, and the unconstitutionality of the speed limit itself under the Commerce Clause. ABA Chen's complexion visibly waned. An unconstitutional speed limit? A notion so preposterous he'd scarcely imagined it. But regarding Maya, with the implacable resolve shining in her eyes, he couldn't dismiss it out of hand. This victory would not come easily. A full-blown trial was upon them. Bren Miller leaned forward, senses alert, journalist's gut screaming. This was the narrative of a lifetime, and she wouldn't squander a single syllable. The girl, Maya Nguyen, had seized the focus in the room, and now it was her job to show why they should all care. More than just a question of can she win, it was what is she hiding? The curveball, a legal loophole. Judge Thompson leaned back, the well-worn leather of his chair sighing beneath him. His fingertips met in a studied arch, a ghost of amusement playing around his mouth. The legal dance they'd been engaged in, the sharp parry and thrust of intellect, had been a welcome departure from the usual procession of ill-prepared defendants. But now, he resolved, it was time to plumb the depths of Maya Nguyen's knowledge, to test her mettle with a truly unexpected challenge. Ms. Nguyen, he began, his voice hardening with formality. You've displayed an impressive grasp of constitutional law. However, the legal landscape is ever shifting, constantly reforming. And occasionally those shifts engender curious predicaments. He paused, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Are you conversant with the ramifications of the recent adjudication concerning Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, specifically its potential bearing on state traffic ordinances? A ripple of surprise spread through the gallery. ADH winced almost imperceptibly, a shadow of apprehension flitting across his features. Section 230 was a legal minefield, a tangled web of arguments and interpretations. To yoke it to a simple traffic violation was audacious, even for Judge Thompson's eccentric tastes. Maya Nguyen betrayed no reaction. No hint of dismay, no widening of the eyes. Her dark orbs remained fixed on the judge, calm and unwavering. She paused, a beat longer this time, as if genuinely wrestling with the implications. The silence that descended was palpable, magnified by the metronomic pulse of the wall clock. The air thrummed with anticipation. Bren Miller, perched on her unforgiving seat, leaned forward, her pen hovering above her notepad. This was the crucible, the moment that would either cement Maya's reputation as a legal prodigy, or expose her as a mere illusionist. Your Honor, Maya said, her tone measured and controlled. I am familiar with the ruling. Judge Thompson's eyebrows arched slightly. Then perhaps you would illuminate the court as to its possible relevance to this particular case. He waved a hand in a sweeping gesture. Keeping in mind, of course, that we are addressing a simple speeding infraction governed by state law. ADH decided to interject. Your Honor, with all due respect, I struggle to see the connection. Section 230 deals with Internet service providers and content moderation. It seems wholly inapplicable to the present circumstances. He straightened his tie, a subconscious act of self-assertion. Judge Thompson raised a silencing hand. Let us hear Ms. Nguyen's perspective, Mr. Chin. I find myself intrigued. He turned his gaze back to Maya, his expression expectant. Maya drew a slow, considered breath. Your Honor, the connection resides in the potential for challenging the state's evidence, specifically the radar gun readings, through the lens of Section 230's interpretation concerning data integrity and algorithmic bias. If the radar gun software incorporates non-transparent algorithms, hosted or processed by a third-party internet provider, then the veracity and reliability of that data may fall within the purview of Section 230's liability shields, or the lack thereof. A low buzz filled the courtroom. It was a desperate gamble, a Hail Mary pass, but the way she articulated it, The sheer audacity of the concept was stunning. Judge Thompson stroked his chin, his gaze narrowing in contemplation. That's a decidedly unconventional reading, Ms. Nguyen. Are you positing that the municipality, by employing a radar device reliant on potentially obscure algorithms, could be inadvertently benefiting from the protections, or lack thereof, afforded by Section 230, thereby insulating potentially flawed data from rigorous examination? Precisely, Your Honor, Maya affirmed, her voice steady. If the algorithms used to interpret the radar signals are prone to prejudice, or if the data stream is susceptible to tampering via online channels, then the evidence presented becomes inherently suspect. ADHN scoffed derisively. That's preposterous. We are addressing a basic speeding violation, not a complex case of online libel. The radar device undergoes regular certification, periodic maintenance, and is operated by a trained officer. Certification and maintenance do not preclude the potential for algorithmic prejudice, Mr. Chin, Maya countered, her tone polite but firm. Nor do they guarantee the security of data transmitted across potentially compromised networks. The bedrock of justice demands transparency and accountability. If the city cannot vouch for the precision and impartiality of the data it employs to convict me, then the prosecution's case is fundamentally untenable. The judge steepled his fingers once more, the silence now thick with something other than mere anticipation. It was a silence etched with genuine deliberation. He shifted his gaze from Maya to ADHN, his expression inscrutable. The courtroom held its collective breath, awaiting his judgment, the atmosphere heavy with unanswered questions and simmering legal intrigue. This battle of wits had taken a sharply divergent and potentially decisive turn. The revelation, insight beyond her years. The silence stretched, thick and expectant, as Judge Thompson peered down at Maya over his spectacles. He tapped a pen against his chin, a rhythmic punctuation to the unasked question hanging in the air. Finally, he spoke, his voice betraying a flicker of genuine curiosity. Ms. Nguyen, you've introduced a rather novel interpretation. Perhaps you could elaborate on the specific connection you perceive between Section 230 and the prosecution's evidence? Maya remained remarkably composed. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom seemed to catch and reflect in her dark eyes, giving them an almost unnerving brilliance. Your Honor, she began, her voice calm and steady. The connection lies in the potential for algorithmic bias within the radar gun's data processing, and the plausible influence of third-party internet providers on that data's integrity. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Specifically, she continued, radar guns, like many modern technologies, rely on complex algorithms to interpret the raw data they collect. These algorithms are often proprietary and, crucially, may be hosted or maintained by third-party entities. Section 230 shields these entities from liability for content created by others. If the radar gun's algorithm contains biases, even unintentional ones, that systematically inflate speed readings under certain conditions, the manufacturer and potentially the hosting provider might be immune from legal recourse, due to Section 230 protections. This could lead to faulty evidence being presented in court. She took a small breath, her gaze unwavering. Furthermore, the transmission of data from the radar gun to the police department's servers may pass through various internet service providers. If one of these providers, deliberately or inadvertently, alters the data stream, perhaps through data compression or routing errors, the integrity of the evidence could be compromised. Again, Section 230 could limit liability for these providers, making it difficult to ascertain the true accuracy of the speed reading. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The lawyers present exchanged bewildered glances, their faces a mixture of incredulity and grudging admiration. They had heard of Section 230 in the context of social media and online content moderation, but its application to the mundane realm of traffic enforcement was revolutionary, bordering on audacious. Maya's composure was striking. She wasn't merely reciting legal jargon, she was articulating a complex argument with a clarity that belied her age and apparent inexperience. She handled the legal concepts with the deftness of someone who had spent years immersed in their intricacies. Bren Miller, perched on the edge of her seat in the press gallery, was furiously typing on her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen as she crafted a tweet, each word carefully chosen to capture the unfolding drama. Asterisk. Exploding head, hold the phone. This girl, Maya Nguyen, just invoked Section 230 in a speeding ticket case. Arguing algorithmic bias in the radar gun data. Hashtag speeding ticket revolution, hashtag law Twitter, hashtag unexpected twist. Asterisk. She hit send and watched with satisfaction as the tweet immediately garnered attention. The online world, always hungry for the bizarre and unexpected, was starting to take notice. Her phone buzzed incessantly with retweets and comments. Back in the courtroom, Judge Thompson leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Ms. Nguyen, he said slowly, your argument, while unconventional, raises some valid points regarding data integrity and potential bias. However, proving such bias or data alteration would require significant expertise and resources. Do you have the means to present such evidence? Maya simply smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of her lips. That, Your Honor, is a question I intend to address as the case progresses. The courtroom erupted. A cacophony of voices filled the space as lawyers, reporters, and spectators alike struggled to process what they had just witnessed. The air crackled with a mixture of disbelief, excitement, and a palpable sense of unease. This wasn't just a speeding ticket anymore. It was a challenge to the very foundations of evidence-based law enforcement. Bren Miller, amidst the chaos, punched out another tweet. Asterisk. Police car light, courtroom erupts. Police car light, Judge Thompson visibly stunned. Maya Nguyen just implied she can prove algorithmic bias in the radar gun. Is this David versus Goliath or something else entirely? Hashtag speeding ticket saga, hashtag legal uprising, hashtag who is Maya Nguyen? Asterisk. The hashtag who is Maya Nguyen began to trend. The internet was abuzz with speculation. Was she a legal prodigy? A disgruntled programmer with inside knowledge of radar gun algorithms? Or something else entirely? The mystery surrounding Maya Nguyen deepened with each passing moment. Judge Thompson rapped his gavel, struggling to restore order. Silence! I will have order in my courtroom! He glared at the assembled crowd, his face a mask of controlled exasperation. He then turned his attention back to Maya. Ms. Nguyen, I must caution you. Making such claims without the ability to substantiate them could be considered frivolous and could result in sanctions. Maya nodded respectfully. I understand, Your Honor. I assure you, I am prepared to present evidence to support my claims. Her voice was soft but firm, radiating an unwavering confidence that was both captivating and unnerving. The judge, and everyone else in the courtroom, felt a growing sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that transcended the confines of a simple traffic court. The game had changed, and Maya Nguyen was clearly playing by her own set of rules. A legal battle begins. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent courtroom. Ms. Nguyen, he began, a note of newfound respect coloring his tone. The court acknowledges your singular approach. While I harbor reservations about Section 230's pertinence to a traffic infraction, I must concede your understanding of the law appears more than adequate. You may proceed with your defense. However, he cautioned, his eyes now sharp chips of flint, confine your arguments to the matter at hand, and present evidence that directly impeaches the radar reading's veracity. Maya gave the barest dip of her head in acknowledgement. Overhead, the fluorescent tubes cast a stark sheen on her sable hair as she pivoted to face ADA David Chin, whose face was now blossoming into a florid plum. Mr. Chin, she stated, her voice a calm stream. I understand the prosecution's argument hinges on the dependability of the Stalker DSR-2X radar gun, serial number 47B92 Gamma. Correct? Chin, momentarily thrown off balance, straightened his tie. Indeed, Ms. Nguyen. The device was properly calibrated and operated by a trained officer. The evidence is irrefutable. Irrefutable? Maya queried, a glint of amusement dancing in her eyes. Or simply, unchallenged? Let's dissect this irrefutability, shall we? I propose to the court that the prosecution has failed to lay a sufficient groundwork for the radar evidence's admissibility. Specifically, they've neglected to demonstrate the absence of algorithmic skew in the device's signal processing. Chen scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Algorithmic skew? In a radar gun? Come now, Ms. Nguyen. It measures speed. It doesn't pass judgment. With respect, Mr. Chen, that reveals a rather rudimentary grasp of the technology involved. Maya responded smoothly. The Stalker DSR-2X, like many contemporary radar guns, utilizes sophisticated algorithms to sift out ambient noise, adjust for atmospheric conditions, and translate Doppler shifts. These algorithms, like any line of code, are products of human design, and therefore vulnerable to biases, whether deliberate or inadvertent. These biases can manifest as systematic errors in velocity readings under specific circumstances. She paused, letting her words saturate the air. For instance, the algorithm may exhibit heightened sensitivity to the Doppler shift reflected from larger vehicles, resulting in an inflated speed estimate for smaller vehicles, such as, a silver Honda Civic. A subtle smile flickered at the corners of her mouth. Chen sputtered. That's pure conjecture. You possess no proof to substantiate such a claim. Not quite, Maya corrected, brandishing a slender, bound document. I commissioned an independent assessment of the Stalker DSR-2XS firmware. This report, authored by Dr. Anya Sharma, a leading authority on signal processing and algorithmic bias at MIT, details potential vulnerabilities and skews within the device's signal filtering protocols. Dr. Sharma's analysis suggests that under certain environmental variables, conditions that, incidentally, prevailed on the day of the alleged infraction, as detailed in the arresting officer's own narrative, the device is predisposed to exaggerating the speed of vehicles with a diminished radar signature by as much as 7%. Chen's eyes narrowed to slits. 7%. Enough to potentially invalidate the entire charge. He hadn't foreseen this line of attack. He dealt with pro-SE defendants before. They were typically ill-equipped, easily cowed. This felt entirely different, a premeditated ambush. He shot to his feet. Your Honor, he declared, his voice regaining its familiar edge. I object. This report constitutes hearsay. Dr. Sharma is not present to offer testimony, and we're denied the opportunity to cross-examine her on her findings. Objection noted, Judge Thompson responded, peering at the document over the rim of his spectacles. Ms. Nguyen, how do you intend to navigate this hearsay objection? Your Honor, I intend to call Dr. Sharma as a witness via video conference. She stands ready to testify and endure cross-examination concerning her findings. I have already made the pertinent arrangements. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. Chen felt a cold trickle of sweat slide down his temple. He scanned his notes, frantically searching for a rebuttal, some chink in her armor. But he unearthed nothing. He had geared up for a routine traffic case, not a clash of technical titans. Maya pressed her advantage, unyielding. Furthermore, Your Honor, I wish to direct the court's attention to the radar gun's maintenance logs. While the device allegedly underwent calibration, the documentation proves deficient. There's no record of the specific calibration standard utilized, nor any indication of the accepted margin of error during the procedure. Devoid of this information, it becomes impossible to ascertain whether the device functioned within permissible parameters on the day in question. She paused again, her gaze unflinching. The prosecution's case hinges on the premise that this radar gun is infallible. I intend to demonstrate that it is not. Chen felt a deepening disquiet. This was transcending a simple speeding citation. This was an assault on the bedrock of evidence-driven law enforcement. And Maya Nguyen, armed with quiet self-assurance and an arsenal of technical insights, was leading the charge. He had underestimated her, and a creeping dread told him he was about to pay a heavy price. An offer and a verdict. Your Honor, Maya declared, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. The prosecution's case rests on a foundation of conjecture and incomplete data. They ask for blind faith in a machine, one demonstrably fallible under the very conditions in question. With a sweeping gesture, she indicated the radar gun's manual displayed on the exhibit table. They would have you disregard the patchy maintenance logs, the questionable calibration figures, and the very real specter of algorithmic bias influencing the speed assessment. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, locking momentarily with the ADA's skeptical frown and the journalist's furiously scribbling pen. This transcends a mere traffic violation, Your Honor. It's about accountability. It's about demanding transparency from the technologies that increasingly dictate our lives. It's about safeguarding justice from being a casualty of algorithmic efficiency. Maya advanced towards the bench. I am not condoning reckless driving. I am contesting the reliability of the evidence leveled against me. Uncritical reliance on flawed technology, absent rigorous oversight and impartial verification, breeds the opportunity for widespread injustice. A ruling against me, Your Honor, would tacitly condone such a possibility. A hush descended as Maya finished, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Thompson leaned back, his expression an inscrutable mask as he tapped a pen against his jaw, deep in thought. The ADA nervously shuffled his documents, appearing increasingly discomfited. The silence shattered with the crisp click of heels on the marble floor. All eyes swung towards the entrance. There, radiating an almost palpable aura of sharp intellect and fierce resolve, stood Professor Eleanor Vance. Her silver hair, pulled into a severe chignon, framed dark eyes that dissected the room with laser precision. She moved with purposeful grace, her impeccably tailored suit a sharp contrast to the courtroom's more conventional attire. Professor Vance approached the bar, addressing the court. Your Honor, may I be heard? Judge Thompson, visibly surprised, offered a curt nod. My name is Eleanor Vance, professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley. I have been following this case with keen interest. Turning towards Maya, she continued, her voice surprisingly warm. Ms. Nguyen, I have been deeply impressed by your legal astuteness and your command of intricate technological arguments. I am here today to offer you a full scholarship to Berkeley Law. A wave of whispers cascaded through the room. The journalist's pen became a blur of motion. The ADA looked as if he had bitten into something intensely sour. Maya stood motionless, caught completely off guard. Professor Vance amplified her voice slightly to overcome the murmurs. Ms. Nguyen, your talent is undeniable. With the proper training and resources, you possess the potential to make an invaluable contribution to the legal field, especially concerning the increasingly complex intersection of technology and justice. Her unwavering gaze locked onto Maya's. This is more than simply financial aid, Ms. Nguyen. It's an invitation to join a collective of scholars devoted to shaping law's future. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, restoring order. Professor Vance, while your interjection is certainly unforeseen, I acknowledge your interest in Ms. Nguyen's future. Nevertheless, we must conclude this matter. He returned his attention to Maya. Ms. Nguyen, you have articulated a persuasive argument. You have articulated valid concerns about the trustworthiness of the evidence presented by the prosecution. The court finds that the prosecution has not established its case beyond a reasonable doubt. He paused, his gaze lingering on Maya. The case is dismissed. A collective gasp rippled outward. Maya exhaled deliberately, a faint smile playing on her lips. The ADA looked thunderstruck, his carefully constructed case collapsing around him. Judge Thompson's gavel echoed. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom began to clear, Professor Vance approached Maya. Well, Ms. Nguyen, she said, extending a hand. What do you say? Shall we make you a golden bear? Maya clasped her hand, her grip firm and unwavering. Professor Vance, she responded, her eyes glinting with intelligence and a hint of hidden resolve. I believe we shall. Outside the courthouse, the journalist, identified as Sarah Chen of the Bay Area Chronicle, approached Maya. Ms. Nguyen, could I steal a few moments? I'd be eager to hear more about your case and your future plans, perhaps? Maya smiled faintly, an air of mystery surrounding her. Perhaps, Ms. Chen. But first, I suspect there are phone calls to be made. She glanced back at the courthouse, a steely determination hardening her gaze. This, I rather suspect, is merely a prelude. A rising star. The phone bleated incessantly. Outside her unassuming apartment, a phalanx of news trucks pulsed, their satellite arrays glinting under the relentless California sun. Maya Nguyen, the overnight internet sensation, observed the scene from behind a veil of lowered blinds, clutching a steaming mug of jasmine tea. Its fragrance, normally a balm, did little to soothe the anxious knot in her stomach. The courtroom now felt like a staged memory, a meticulously crafted performance. The ADA's sputtering indignation, the jurors' rapt attention, the enigmatic Judge Thompson. She remained an enigma, a puzzle Maya hadn't solved. Intrigued? Undoubtedly. Respectful? Perhaps grudgingly so. Yet beneath the surface, she sensed a profound curiosity, an unspoken inquiry hanging in the air like courtroom dust. Her laptop screen blazed with headlines. Traffic ticket triumph. Tech was Wow's court. Section 230 shields speeding savior. Algorithmic justice on trial. The comment sections roiled with a toxic blend of adoration and animosity. Some proclaimed her a champion of the dispossessed, a digital age David facing down Goliath. Others denounced her as a dangerous radical, sabotaging law enforcement with her digital wizardry. Digital wizardry, she murmured, the tea's warmth a small comfort. It was simply deciphering the code, understanding the latent biases embedded within algorithms, and revealing a system's inherent flaws. Professor Vance's scholarship offered to Berkeley Law resonated in her thoughts. It was undeniably alluring, an opportunity to refine her skills, to learn from luminaries, to sculpt the future of law in an era defined by technology. Yet, a part of her recoiled. Law school felt like a gilded cage, a trajectory designed to perpetuate the very system she had just dismantled. She snapped her laptop shut, plunging the room into deeper shadow. The truth lingered unresolved. The traffic ticket was merely the flint, sparking a long-dormant fire. She'd always been captivated by the volatile intersection of technology and justice, the potential for both progress and peril. The existing legal framework felt woefully inadequate to navigate the complexities of the digital landscape. Her phone vibrated, a fresh interview request. Another media outlet clamoring for her story. She muted it, abandoning it to the cushions. The attention felt less like celebration, more like confinement. She yearned for tranquility, for breathing room, for the space to chart her next move. Crossing to the window, she peeked through a narrow slit in the blinds. The news vans remained, a pack of watchful predators, waiting for her to emerge. She imagined their questions, their preconceptions, their attempts to categorize and define her. She refused to be defined. She would leverage this newfound platform, this unexpected notoriety, to effect meaningful change. To advocate for equitable algorithms, for transparent code, for a legal system equipped to understand the intricacies of technology. To prevent the societal prejudices from infecting the very tools meant to deliver impartial justice. The weight of responsibility settled upon her, a burden both heavy and welcomed. It was an immense undertaking, a seemingly impossible objective. But for the first time in a long while, Maya felt a profound sense of purpose, a clear direction beckoning. The path ahead wouldn't be smooth, but she was prepared to tread it. Across town, Judge Jedediah Thompson reclined in his worn leather chair within his chambers, overlooking the sprawling cityscape. The muted glow of the television screen illuminated his seasoned features as he observed Maya Nguyen, composed and eloquent, fielding questions on a morning news program. Her conviction was palpable, her words carefully chosen, her gaze unwavering. He sipped his tepid coffee, a subtle smile gracing his lips. He presided over countless defendants, some remorseful, some defiant, most simply bewildered. But Maya Nguyen was a singular case. Her legal arguments held merit, certainly, but it was her presence that truly captivated him. The understated self-assurance, the unwavering faith in her intellect, the subtle spark of rebellion simmering in her eyes. She was a force to acknowledge. Initially, he'd viewed her self-representation with annoyance, deeming it a frivolous waste of the court's resources. Now, he considered the possibility that it was a strategic gambit, a calculated move to amplify her message. He silenced the television, the news anchor's effusive praise dissolving into silence. He found himself concurring with a significant portion of Maya's argument. The law demanded adaptation to the digital age, confronting the ethical dilemmas presented by algorithms and artificial intelligence. He leaned back, his gaze drawn to a framed photograph on his desk. It depicted him and his daughter, years prior, when she was a child with eyes wide with wonder. He pondered the world she would inherit, a world molded by technology and algorithms, a world where justice itself could be reduced to code. His gaze returned to the now silent television screen, to Maya Nguyen's resolute face. Perhaps, he mused, she was the catalyst to shape that world, to ensure that technology served justice, rather than subverting it. He felt a surge of hope, a rejuvenated sense of optimism. The law, after all, was an evolving entity, in constant flux, perpetually adapting. And occasionally it required a spark, a challenge, a rising star, to ignite the necessary transformation. He reached for his coffee, his smile deepening imperceptibly. The curtain was rising.